Unbelievable drone strike turns Russia's 28-bead missile factory into ashes. At 6:12 a.m., just as the first rays of sun stretched over the industrial skyline of Volgorinsk, the quiet hum of the city was torn apart. What should have been an ordinary morning commute for factory workers turned into a nightmare that noon saw coming. The sky, usually filled with the soft chatter of birds and the glow of dawn, suddenly buzzed with the mechanical roar of dozens of low-flying drones. They weren't here by accident. They were on a deadly mission aimed straight at one of Russia's most prized strongholds. A billion-dollar missile factory thought to be impenetrable. Within seconds, the first wave of UAVs scut across the rooftops, hugging the horizon so tightly that radar operators barely noticed until alarms screamed too late. The factory, a sprawling fortress of steel and reinforced hangars, had long been praised by Russian state media as invincible. That morning it was anything but. The drones plunged toward the Western Assembly Hall, slamming through reinforced concrete with shaped charges. The blasts echoed like rolling thunder, rattling windows across neighborhoods and sending shockwaves through the earth. Fire erupted instantly, rising into a towering inferno visible miles away. Residents fled into the streets, stunned as Thesky filled with smoke and the shriek of more incoming drones. A second swarmed into the electronics depot, where precision chips and gyroscopes lay stacked. The detonation sent sparks cascading like fireworks, a cruel contrast against the calm sunrise just minutes earlier. By the 10-minute mark, chaos had swallowed the country. Russian defenses scrambled, autocannons roared, interceptors launched, but the sheer number of drones slipping through was overwhelming. Moscow's untouchable crown jewel was cracking apart in the light of morning. And now I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this from? If you think Ukraine's precision will keep turning the tide, press 1 in the comments. If you believe Russia will strike back harder, press 2. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your voice drives this channel forward. The moment the first explosions ripped through the missile plant, Russian commanders in the sector were thrown into chaos. Radios buzzed with conflicting orders, each officer shouting over the next as reports poured in. The sun had barely climbed the horizon. Yet the once quiet base now looked like a war zone. Columns of smoke towered upward, blotting out the pale morning sky while the facto's internal alarms screeched through the D of battle. On the ground, perimeter guards scrambled for cover as shock waves from secondary blasts knocked them off their feet. Ammunition bunkers rattled, their reinforced doors trembled as if ready to burst. The sound was deafening, steel beams snapping, propellant tanks roaring into fireballs, the relentless hammer of autok cannons spitting tracer rounds into the morning light. But no matter how fiercely the defenses fought, they were drowning in numbers. Ukraine's planners had studied these defenses 4 weeks, and it showed. While Russian crews fired interceptor missiles at Akois high above, the real strike team of FPV drones flew low, weaving silently between warehouses and terrain. Operators thousands of miles away watched their live feeds with clinical precision, steering each drone toward its target. The guidance system building was the next to go. Its walls in seconds as flames devoured racks of irreplaceable electronics. By 6:30 a.m., Russia's vaunted defenses were unraveling. An Mi-28 attack helicopter lifted off in a desperate attempt to restore control, its rotors chopping through the thick smoke, but jamming signals scrambled its targeting systems, leaving the gunship swerving blindly as drones streaked past. Every successful strike was another dagger to Russia's pride, every plume of fire a reminder that its invincible was anything but. The morning that began in silence was now a battlefield, one Russia had never expected to face in its own backyard. By 6:42 a.m., the strike had grown into something far beyond a precision attack. It was a rolling catastrophe. The first detonations in the assembly halls had ignited massive propellant tanks, and now the factory grounds themselves were unraveling piece by piece. The roar of explosions echoed across the valley like a drum beat, each louder than the last, as volatile stockpiles went up in blinding flashes. A supply yard filled with unfinished missile casings was the next victim. One drone plowed directly into the stacks, its shaped charge setting off a chain reaction that scattered fragments of steel across the compound. Some pieces were hurled hundreds of feet, embedding themselves into nearby walls like arrows from Agent Bow. Russian soldiers trying Tor group near the perimeter fled again as a wave of secondary blasts rippled through the base. Thick columns of black smoke curled skyward, so dense that satellite operators later confirmed the plume was visible from nearly 20 men away, civilian. Witnesses in nearby towns described the morning sky as swallowed by fire with windows shattering in unison. As the shock waves rolled outward, the calm sunrise was gone, replaced by a skyline that looked like the heart of a volcano. Inside the plant, collapse was everywhere. Roofs buckled under the strain. Towers of steel melted in the searing heat, and control rooms were buried beneath falling debris. Without power, automated systems went offline. Russian engineers, once confident in their fortress-like defenses, now struggled just to breathe through the smoke while alarms range endlessly. For Ukraine's operators watching from afar, the images streaming in told the story. The strike had exceeded expectations. The backbone of Russia's missile program wasn't just damaged. It was being consumed alive, and in those flames, Moscow's illusion of untouchable strength was burning away minute by minute. By 6:55 a.m., Russian commanders had no choice but to unleash everything at their disposal. De facto's defensive perimeter lit up like a storm. Panzer S-1 autocannons raped the sky, spewing endless streams of traces that painted fiery arcs through the morning haze. Surface to-air missiles streaked upward, detonating in blossoms of white smoke as they slammed into decoy drones. The noise was deafening, a chaotic orchestra of firepower. But Ukraine's real strike package remained untouchable. Flying solo, they skimmed treetops. The FPV drones hugged the terrain, darting between smoke pillars and broken walls. Operators maneuvered with ruthless precision, guiding each UAV toward specific weak points already mapped weeks in advance. One slammed into a power substation, plunging entire sections of the facility into blackout. Another ripped into the underground fuel storage vents, forcing fire to erupt from the ground like geysers. Russian troops on the ground tried to rally. Some manned anti-air machine guns, sweeping the horizon with desperate bursts. Others scrambled to move ammunition convoys out of the blast radius, only to see them struck mid-evacuation, erupting in showers of sparks. The Mi-28 helicopter circling overhead fired salvos of rockets into the smoke, but its sensors jammed and blinded missed the real targets. Every countermeasure Moscow threw into the fight seemed to fail. For every drone shot down, 2 more punched through. And each impact wasn't just a strike. It was a wound to Russia's pride. Proof that its billion-dollar defenses were vulnerable to low-cost machines built in secret workshops. As the sun climbed higher, the scale of the disaster became impossible to deny. What began as a sudden strike was evolving into a humiliation with Moscow's crown jewel factory, turning into a blazing graveyard of steel and shattered confidence. By 7:10 a.m., the missile factory was no longer a fortress. It was a collapsing ruin. Entire sections of the complex caved in as fire chewed through beams designed to withstand artillery. Walls split apart, sending showers of debris cascading into already burning warehouses. What had once been a symbol of Moscow's technological might now resembled a battlefield cratered by relentless airstrikes. The most devastating blow came when flames reached the central propellant chamber. Stored in massive above-ground tanks, the volatile mix ignited with a roar that could be heard across the district. The explosion lifted a fireball into the morning sky, dwarfing the earlier blast, and sent shockwaves rippling outward with enough force to rattle buildings miles away. Civilians watching from rooftops clutched their ears as windows shattered in unison. Russian engineers and soldiers who hadn't evacuated were thrown into chaos. Some sprinted blindly through smoke-filled corridors. Others tried desperately to salvage equipment, dragging crates of electronics into the open, only to see them engulfed moments later. Commanders barked orders over radios, but the network crackled with static, jammed by Ukraine's electronic warfare teams. Confusion became paralysis. Meanwhile, Ukrainian drone feeds confirmed what intelligence had predicted. De facto's production lines were beyond saving. Conveyor belts, assembly bays, and control hubs were nothing more than molten wreckage. Every heart of Russia's missile manufacturing had been gutted in less than an hour. For Moscow, the implications were staggering. Years of investment, billions of dollars in equipment, and the confidence of invulnerability were all consumed by the morning inferno. And for Ukraine, the victory was more than tactical. It was symbolic. A swarm of small, cheap machines had exposed the soft underbelly of a giant, proving that determination and planning could dismantle even the most fortified stronghold. By 7:25 a.m., the destruction had spilled far beyond the factory gates. Secondary explosions rocked the surrounding district, each detonation echoing like thunder across the countryside. Rocket motors stored in outdoor yards continued to ignite, launching themselves skyward like unguided fireworks before crashing back to Earth in violent bursts. The ground shook with every blast, a reminder that the attack was not finished, even as the drones completed their runs. Plumes of thick, oily smoke blanketed entire neighborhoods. Villagers miles away reported choking air, their homes rattled by concussive waves. Roads leading to the complex were cratered and littered with twisted metal, making it nearly impossible for emergency responders to reach the inferno. Fire brigades who tried were forced back as new explosions erupted without warning. Even hardened soldiers admitted the heat was unbearable, the firestorm too intense to approach. Inside the collapsing perimeter, panic reigned. Russian crews abandoned half-buried vehicles, leaving ammunition trucks smoldering in the open. Others tried to salvage documents or drag wounded comrades out of the chaos, but the constant detonations made rescue efforts feel like suicide missions. Commanders shouted through megaphones, but their orders vanished under the roar of flames and collapsing steel. Meanwhile, Ukrainian operators watched through drone feeds as their strike unfolded exactly as planned. Each explosion meant fewer missiles reaching Ukrainian cities, fewer warheads assembled, fewer threats looming overhead. To them, the inferno wasn't just destruction. It was a turning point. As the morning sun climbed higher, the image was inescapable. Russia's crown jewel was gone, and the ripple effects were already spreading. The factory that once supplied the backbone of long-range strikes had been reduced to little more than smoking rubble. And with every passing minute, the cost for Moscow grew heavier. By 7:40 a.m., while the factory continued to burn, analysts in Kiev were already celebrating the precision of their plan. This wasn't a lucky hit. It was months of intelligence work coming to life. Satellite imagery had charted every truck entering and leaving the compound. Recon drones had mapped the blind spots in radar coverage, circling for weeks, toraccord shifts and guard rotations, and identified choke points. Even intercepted radio chatter revealed when engineers worked late into the night, giving Clusto peak activity inside. The brilliance of the operation lay in simplicity. Ukraine's planners knew the Facto's vertical defenses were formidable, designed to repel ballistic missiles or high-altitude bombers. But those same defenses were blind at low levels, where drones could slip beneath radar beams. Analysts realized that propellant and warhead stockpiles were left above ground due to overcrowding, essentially creating a network of ticking bombs waiting to be triggered. To exploit this, they staged the assault in waves. The first drones were decoys, cheap wood frames carrying transmitters to flood Russian screens with false targets. These lured expensive interceptors into the sky, exhausting defenses. Then came the real killers, FPV kamikaze drones and loitering munitions, each guided with live camera feeds and shaped charges. Their operators trained for weeks, rehearsing exact angles of attack to maximize destruction. Electronic warfare units joined in, blasting ghost signals that scrambled radar and blinded missile crews. By the time Russia realized the ruse, its systems were already saturated, its guns firing blindly into empty skies. For Ukraine, the strike wasn't just a blow against infrastructure. It was proof that brains could beat brawn. Careful planning, relentless observation, and the will to adapt had transformed a swarm of inexpensive drones into a weapon capable of crippling a superpower's prized facility. By 7:55 a.m., the inferno was no longer just a local disaster. It was a spectacle broadcast across the globe. Satellite imagery from NATO allies captured the black plume rising thousands of feet, circulating the images to military analysts in Washington, London, and Brussels. Within hours, international media outlets began running breaking headlines. Russia's billion-dollar missile hub reduced to rubble. For Western observers, the strike was more than a tactical success. It validated months of investment in Ukraine's growing drone program. Intelligence. Communities marveled at how low-cost UAVs had dismantled a site guarded by some of Russia's most advanced defenses. Military experts pointed out the symbolism. Billion-dollar Surface-to air systems had failed to stop drones, costing a fraction of their value. In Moscow, however, silence reigned. State television initially reported a technical fire before being drowned out by amateur videos flooding social platforms. Clips showed fireballs rising into the dawn sky, the crackle of secondary explosions echoing in the background, and panicked residents describing their homes shaking as if hit by an earthquake. The Kremlin's narrative crumbled almost as quickly as the factory itself. China, India, and even Middle Eastern partners who once looked to Russia for weapons were watching closely. If such a heavily fortified facility could fall in less than an hour, what did that mean for their liability of Russian arms exports? Confidence in Moscow's military-industrial complex began to waver. For Ukraine, the diplomatic win was priceless. The attack demonstrated not only resilience, but also ingenuity, reinforcing international support and ensuring further aid. What began as a swarm of buzzing engines over a quiet sunrise had evolved into a global message. Russia's strongest walls could be breached, and its war machine was far from invincible. By 8:10 a.m., the scale of the disaster was sinking in at Russia's high command. Reports from the front lines confirmed what the smoke rising over Volgogradsk already made clear missile shipments had stopped. Units that once relied on daily deliveries of precision-guided munitions were suddenly told to ration supplies. Commanders accustomed to firing dozens of long-range strikes each morning now received orders to conserve, turning instead to older, less reliable artillery. Economically, the blow was staggering. The destroyed factory alone had been valued at nearly $3 billion, but analysts estimated another $600 million in finished components, guidance systems, and stockpiled warheads were lost in the blaze. Worse still, the specialized machinery needed to rebuild production had been obliterated. With sanctions choking imports of critical microchips and electronics, replacing those systems could take years, if it was possible at all. On the battlefield, Ukraine began noticing results within days. Missile barges that once terrorized cities grew less frequent, and the accuracy of Russia's remaining arsenal visibly declined. Civilians reported missiles veering off course, striking empty fields, or exploding prematurely in the sky. For soldiers at the front, the change was tangible. Every drone launched, every strike carried out felt like it had bought little more breathing room. In Moscow, however, frustration boiled. Military bloggers raged at the failure of air defenses, questioning how drones cobbled together in workshops could dismantle a crown jewel of Russian industry. The loss wasn't just material, it was psychological. The myth of invulnerability had cracked, exposing deep weaknesses in Russia's war machine. The morning strike had ended hours earlier, but the fallout was only beginning. Russia faced not just flames and ruins, but the long shadow of doubt stretching over its military future. By 8:25 a.m., the inferno had slowed, but its scars were permanent. What remained of the missile factory was a blackened wasteland, melted steel, cratered roads, and silence where once machines had churned out weapons by the hundreds. For Ukraine, the operation was not just a military triumph, but a statement. Ingenuity and persistence could shatter even the most formidable opponent. For Russia, it was a sobering lesson that no fortress is truly untouchable. Strategists around the world noted the symbolism. High-cost defenses had crumbled against low-cost drones, rewriting the rules of modern warfare. The strike proved that agility, intelligence, and careful preparation could outweigh brute force. Yet beyond the battlefield, the lesson ran deeper. In the smoke and rubble lay a reminder of how escalation only multiplies suffering, and how technology designed for destruction always leaves human lives scarred in its wake. As morning turned today, the world absorbed the message. Power alone cannot guarantee security. Resilience and adaptability will define the future. For viewers following this story, the takeaway is clear. History is being written not just with missiles and drones, but with the choices leaders make in moments of crisis. And now I turn to you. What do you think this strike truly means? If you stand with Ukraine's ingenuity, press 1 inch the comments. If you believe Russia will adapt and strike back harder, press 2. Wherever you are watching from, don't forget subscribe, share, and like this video. Your voice builds this community, and together we uncover the story shaping tomorrow's world.